and welcome to this episode of the Level Design Podcast. I'm Mark Drew, and I'll be delving deep into the occupation and Ether 1 with Pete Bottomley from Whitepaper Games. Welcome, Peter.
Hello, Mark.
So you're basically the top honcho. You're co-founder, game designer, narrative designer, level designer at Whitepaper Games, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a small team, and by that you just end up doing a lot of tasks. Right. We're 9 people full time with 2 contractors. Right. So size 11 people ship the occupation, for example. Right. We shipped Ether 1 with 6 people, but occupation had 11 people. So we're slowly scaling. But yeah, I co-founded Whitepaper with Benjamin Hill in 2012, but we very quickly had a team of 5 with James Burton, Oliver Farrell, and Nathaniel Apostle. And so it was pretty much for the start of it, 5, and then the 6th person, Dave Smith, who we were just speaking to downstairs, came on as a programmer. So we started developing in UDK just because that's what we knew. We had done our education in Unreal Engine. So we didn't need a programmer to just get started. There was 5 of us. And broadly speaking, I was design, Ben was narrative, Oliver, OJ was art, NJ, Nathaniel was audio, and James was tech art. So
you had a good team.
We had a very design, art-driven studio.
And UDK is like perfect for that kind of studio.
It was perfect, but it also ran the system of Kismet, which was very limited, not as open as Blueprints.
Right.
So you could really only, first-person games were out of the box, kind of. You didn't need any programming because of Unreal Tournament, and you just had to kind of remove the weapon from the character. And you had a bunch of default Unreal Tournament stuff in there. But very quickly, we got Dave on board with some grant funding from Abate, and it helped us pay a programmer to help develop what became Ether 1.
Because Ether 1, I played, I'm being honest to every purpose, like I played most of it. It's just, I haven't gotten to
most people do.
Yeah, I think there's a percentage, I can't remember who I was talking to, and they said like, films, you spend your money on the ending, the big bang at the end, right? Games is the other way around. You want to spend all the production money on the first bit because there's a bit of a tail off in finishing it. And I'm sorry if I've become part of that statistic.
I think that's definitely, we take that into consideration. We design to, Ether 1 at its core, because of the optional gameplay and puzzle solving, you can just do the narrative threads in about 4 hours. But if you're trying to pick apart the puzzles, piece things together, anywhere between 7 and 11, 12 hours is what we've seen.
Really good for me, that's really good for a game.
Yeah.
Right? That's like spot on for a game.
Yeah, and we've seen people spend, 20 plus, even 40 hours on like the Steam playtime. Right. People just dig into the puzzles to really 100% it all and pick through all the notes and stuff. The content's there if people want it. And in a similar way to the occupation, which was, it was intentionally designed, fixed times. It's like we want the game to be a certain length because we're aware of that tail off.
Actually, so we should go into this and make it a little bit clear. So what the occupation is in case people haven't played it. So the occupation is a game set in 1987 about a reporter basically trying to uncover the truth behind a thing called the Union Act, right? Is it literally you can play it in 4 hours? That's the length of the game. Like, no save. You can pause.
It saves at the end of each chapter. So we've broken the game into chapters. So most areas of the game are around between 15 and 30 minutes. There are 2 1-hour sections, which is a chapter. But yeah, essentially outside of the tutorial-y narrative areas, which aren't fixed time just to allow the player to acclimatize to the mechanics or whatever.
The gallery.
So that's the fixed time aspect. That's where the game really starts. And it's like, right, here's the world, go and explore. But before that, we have like an opening prologue, which we don't time restrict, just to allow people to get used to the movement, the mechanics, the narrative, and not make them feel like they're rushing too far through it, kind of set up the story. But as soon as we kind of pull the pin and say go, that's where the fixed time kicks in.
Right. But even though it's a fixed time and you can save at different parts, it has, in a weird way, immense replayability because there's so much to explore. You're basically in a big government building, but they've taken over a museum, isn't it?
Yeah, so there's 2 points going on. The second is that, talking about level design, as a concept, I kind of like the idea of primary and secondary spaces in that here's the functional reason for this space existing, whether it's a gallery, whether it's a library, whether it's a swimming bath, they're the kind of key areas in the game. And then I kind of like building the kind of secondary aspects on top of that. Say this building was built as a gallery space and now we're renovating offices into it. You'll have the older architecture, you'll have the existing framework, and then kind of slot in the newer stuff there, and it builds kind of history and storytelling. And like, we're big proponents of environmental storytelling, like the kind of what happened here concept, where you're looking through drawers and you're piecing together people's lives. We did that in Ether 1, and we doubled down on it in the occupation with the skippable content, like you said, where there is a lot of replayability, just because from Ether 1, I really enjoyed designing the puzzles. They were optional puzzles, and we kind of wanted them to fit contextually into the world, and they were optional.
I mean, you did name like the area Pinwheel.
Yeah,
so this is like a hub and spoke design that was in Ether 1. It literally says there on the tin, this is a pinwheel that you go out and go and get the stuff, bring it back, and watch the memories. Because it's Ether 1, we should say, is you're a character called the Restorer that's going to, in the mind of someone with dementia, and you're getting their memories, piecing their memories together, right? But yeah, so that was quite a surreal game for me, like, without knowing the background, right? Like without just starting to play it.
Yeah, it was a game. It is a game that we're really, really proud of, and it helped propel our studio forward into developing the occupation, and just the lessons learned from there, especially when it comes to playtesting and QAing your game. If you got a linear narrative puzzle game, no unexpected outcomes through the game. It never really surprises you. You've designed it, it's there. So the occupation, because we're huge fans of games like Thief and Dishonored, we wanted something much more systems driven and emergent, still keeping the immersive storytelling aspect. So it's, if you want to loosely describe Ether 1 as the walking simulator, and Dishonored and Thief are the immersive sims, what is it that we can take from the systemic emergent gameplay stuff from those games and bring in the kind of narrative exploration stuff from the walking sims of like taking the game at your own pace and moving through environments and piecing things together. So kind of stripping out all the RPG weapon upgrading stuff and just focusing on that. And so it's kind of putting those two genres together.
And that was one thing that we saw at Res 2017, 2018, I can't remember. But you were the only team that I've seen that had like one of your machines was like, no, here's the editor open. Here's Unreal Engine. Go and have a look at the level. And if you want to know about it, have a look at it. And that's how we started talking. And I was like, what, mind blown, because seeing the construction behind it, the fact that, well, the AI does its own thing, right? It's like, it's very AI. I mean, it's not just like an NPC that will react to you. They're doing their own thing.
Kaylee Irwin and Johnny Picton were the main people behind AI on the occupation, and what we designed it to be is that everyone would have the fixed routines in a day. So you've woken up at X time, you've gone to a talk, or we're recording this podcast now, you kind of have a routine that you want to try and commit to throughout your day. However, if this fire alarm in the hotel went off right now, we'd react and we'd go outside, and that would change our path. Ultimately, we'd probably come back to the podcast and if the hotel's not burning down and finish recording. And so the idea of it being over a fixed time, people having days, people having jobs to complete, but if the alarm goes off down the corridor or they hear a door slam that they shouldn't be slamming, there's emergent events that are happening that will pull them away from that routine and create some of that gameplay that is the unexpected consequence.
Because they're not like just like going in, and I'm not dissing Dishonored at all, but it's like, I heard something. Okay, it must be nothing. The AI in the occupation actually go, why is that door open? That door shouldn't be open, and they either close it or actually go in and investigate depending on a whole bunch of situations.
And so that was something we're exploring and looking at and wanting to develop further. It was kind of a rudimentary implementation of how we can approach that, and we picked up those kind of ideas first from The Last of Us AI design. There's a AI Pro book, The Last of Us on the front cover. Excellent book for anyone looking to get into AI design. And also the Half-Life 2 talks where generally the Valve level design talks where they talk about kind of tagging systems, and when you pick up the can and throw it down, the guard can kind of remark that you've thrown a can, pick it up kind of thing. And kind of tagged perception system where everything in the world has a tag, and tagged object outputs a stimuli. If it can be perceived or can be heard, I know what tag either just got perceived or heard, and I can say my corresponding line. So just by the fact of stimuli with tag, does it match my perception? play line, that already just brings a high level of immersion to the world. And we definitely can explore that concept further, and those games, Last of Us and Half-Life, do a really, really good job at it. But I think it's kind of good low-hanging fruit to make the AI, it can make them appear as smarter than they actually are, which is obviously the intended consequence for games. It's kind of getting away with as much as you can, smoke and mirrors type thing.
And I think people don't know, there was a Twitter thread by last year, the year before, by Jennifer Schrull, which was, I mean, what are the secrets of, the smoke and mirrors of games came out. Some games, Spec Ops: The Line, for example, someone throws a grenade at you, but actually no one's thrown a grenade at you. A grenade has spawned next to you, and the line's been played, there they are, I'm throwing a grenade, for example, and actually there's no grenade, there's no one's actually throwing it. Does that make sense? It has a massive effect.
Yeah, and I can't remember the exact concept. Again, I think it's in that Level Design Pro book, but Fear was actually one of the first studios to do that as well, with like, I'm calling reinforcements, I'm being hit and stuff like that. They made a lot out of that system,
Yeah, there's a game by some guys called Item 42, and they're basing a lot of their AI on the Fear AI.
Yeah, it's awesome. Great games. Really good games. I enjoy them.
You've released The Occupation earlier this year.
In March,
In March. Then released it for PlayStation.
Yeah, so we shipped on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox.
At the same time?
Yep. That's 7 languages. A lot of work.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of work.
Because normally people go like, okay, so we're going to ship on the PC, then we're going to give you the port, and then we're going to give you the languages, and we're going to keep on working on it, but going out all out in a bunch.
Yeah, and that's what we did with Ether 1. We shipped on PC first, and we shipped in UE3. So it took us a year to move the entire Ether 1 into UE4. And we kind of documented the process of doing that on the forums. And that's kind of how Epic became aware of us, just from moving our game from UE3 to UE4. Wow. And we kind of got invited to events just through us kind of demonstrating the engine change. And then, The Occupation. And it was partly because Unreal 4 just makes it a lot easier to ship on multiple platforms.
I mean, that was more geared towards that, right?
Yeah, I mean, PlayStation, Xbox, PC, I mean, they're all relatively similar. If you ask our programmer, they'll say very different things, but on a high level, they're very similar. Obviously, you got like profile switching stuff, which causes a lot of headache on Xbox and making sure you're accounting for all those different things. But Unreal, for the most part, handles a lot of stuff just out of the box. And it was because we were doing retail as well that SimShip just makes sense in a retail space, because they don't want to ship Xbox discs and then ship PlayStation discs or vice versa. So just trying to tackle everything all at once, which was definitely a huge learning curve.
But it must be amazing, right, having a boxed game.
Yeah.
Was Ether 1 boxed?
Ether 1 was boxed as well,
wow,
yeah.
Okay.
So like just going into game, for example, and just seeing your game on the shelf, there's nothing different. And I remember when we shipped Ether 1, I went into game and Ether 1 was positioned, we didn't position this like in the new charts, and above Ether 1 was The Last of Us, who one of my design mentors, Peter Field, had worked on. He studied at the same university as me. He went to Ninja Theory to work on Enslaved and a bit of Devil May Cry, went over to the US to work on Uncharted 2 and 3, I think, and then The Last of Us. There's a little Easter egg in The Last of Us of Ether 1, which is awesome.
Really?
In The Last of Us. And then he came back to the UK to work at Media Molecule. So his game was up there, The Last of Us. There was Ether 1, and then below it was Dishonored, and Harvey Smith is like one of my design heroes. Like all the talks I listen to, his GDC talks, his blogs on immersive sims definitely inspired a huge part of The Occupation's development. And to see The Last of Us and Dishonored, like Ether 1 sandwiched between them, was just incredible feeling. Yeah, it's awesome.
That is absolutely fantastic, because that's the thing that you see so many games, but you like seeing a box copy of a game. But you've been playing around digitally on a machine and pressing play and blah blah blah. But when you actually have a physical, like you created it.
Yeah, no, it's a hugely gratifying thing, and just the experience. Like when we saw The Occupation, I went to York shortly after The Occupation launched, just for a nice weekend. York's one of my favorite places, and I was just like, I'm curious. I'm walking to York game. It's a small game, and the Occupation was there on the shelf. I was just like, it's just surreal. Like, we've had people sending pictures from Australia and Stockholm and Canada and just all over the world. And people that we know have randomly been on holiday, and why they're in a game store, I don't know, but they're in a game store and they've taken a picture.
Same reason that you were in a game store.
Right, exactly. But yeah, just to see it across the world, it's a crazy, crazy thing. And we're so lucky to be able to do that as a studio, and just moving forward, just excited. I just did a talk this morning about driving that momentum and driving the studio forward into these interesting new challenges, and it's a fun opportunity to start thinking about what's next.
Right, because you were talking about essentially having your 1,000 most devoted.
1,000 true fans.
True fans.
The concept is by Kevin Kelly, and I think it's an article. Well, it's an article online that everyone can read, and I think it's an important article because a lot of the perception is you have to appeal to everyone, you have to get it out there, just shout about it, just speak to anyone that will listen. And the opposite approach is to focus on the people that you want to create your work for and make them feel valued, and in turn they'll value your work by, say we don't ship the game, and we saw this with Ether, that you launch the game on Steam and someone spends $14.99 on your game on Steam. And then it's like, okay, the game's coming to PS4, I'll buy it again. The concept of a true fan is there. It's like, even if we're in a room of 100 people during the talk, all I need to do is appeal to you, because then you'll go and tell your 10 friends, like, oh, I really enjoyed the Occupation, and maybe 3 of them will pick it up. And it's just like, and they'll tell the people. And for the work that really resonates with people, and they bring it up in conversation, they tell people, it's like a personal recommendation. I believe this was interesting, I think you will too. That's a really important thing.
And for games, in a way, it's a lot more important, because despite saying that the Occupation is only like 4 hours, it's not. It's kind of longer because of replay. But for games, you have a lot more investment going into it.
Yeah.
It's not like a 1.5 hour movie film that you're just going to watch, that's it, you're done. So if I gave you a bad suggestion for a movie, you go, oh, well, it wasn't my cup of tea. That doesn't matter. So what you need to have people that are really into it to dedicate, let's say, for 60 hours or something to it, and then tell other people that, no, this is something worth you dedicating to. And I think inversely, that's why a lot of people get angered, because of the expectations of it. And even though they've only paid, whatever, $9.99, $5.99, $4.99, or whatever the game is, they get angry because it's like, I was going to dedicate all this time to you and you failed my expectation, So it's really important to set that, and these suggestions, having people that are saying, I think you'll like it.
Yeah, I mean, as well, because a lot of things are, just streaming nowadays, and we'll definitely see games move over into there, maybe to more of a subscription model, so you won't have to pay the £20 for a game, because we definitely appreciate it. Like, the Occupation at $19.99, that's the thing that you buy that month. Like, if you give yourself a bit of spending money, and a lot of people don't have a huge amount of disposable income, so to know that someone spent 20 quid on something that you've created, that's hugely rewarding. And to know that they then want to go and tell people about that is another thing. So we appreciate that, games are expensive, even though relative to everything else. So I went to a coffee shop this morning, spent £7 on coffee and a coffee. So it doesn't necessarily equate, but the perception is still there that £20 is a lot. So
there was some stat that games are very underpriced.
Well,
like if you're looking at like 1980s prices and stuff like that, they were like $40 then. It's like that'll be like $100 now, or convert that to pounds. But that was
and just as a thought experiment moving forward, I'm thinking, like, where do we value our games and what price do we charge? The Ether one was $14.99, so we felt it fair that Occupation was $19.99. It's definitely much more content. We've put a lot more time into it. Not necessarily that all of those equate to more money, but we set a value on that. But then, where will it be, in another 3 or 4 years' time? Will it be at the £25 price point, or will it go the exact opposite way and become $1.99, $2.99? You just don't know, and that's where the streaming becomes an interesting one, because I was listening to something that Netflix was saying, and the movie will be, 100 million to create. TV season will be 10 million to create. So where are games, we don't know necessarily where games are on that spectrum yet, because they're an expensive thing to create just for the amount of people involved, and they're essentially teams that create them, whereas film and TV have a team come together and then disband. You're trying to generate your studios.
It's a very interesting model, that. I mean, I don't know why. I mean, I do know why it is, because it's kind of different that you don't have this kind of like idea of a company that gets formed just to do that game and then disbands. It's like then you all take your profit, you get your, as you say, your $800 royalty check for Shawshank Redemption that you worked on. So I find it kind of tough from that angle, saying how do you go? Why would you start a studio rather than saying, hey, we're going to make a game, and the studio doesn't matter because the studio kind of really forms or looks viable after you've shipped that game. So how do you keep that studio going through that essentially long tail of between building it?
Yeah, it's really tough. And I think we will definitely start to see the game industry moving more in terms of contractors and freelancers. I think just inherently, just as people start creating work for themselves, like yourself, you're creating a podcast, you're creating like almost like your own identity. So people are coming to you for that. It's not necessarily a large team. I mean, you'll probably have people that work with you, but you know, you're putting stuff out there, and a lot of people are doing that on an individual level, and it does become tough in terms of running a studio, in that, yeah, we just need to make sure our team is taken care of, and that comes with all its own stresses, where if you can imagine, well, we've got an approved budget of, you know, X amount, we've created the game, we've spent X amount, and now everyone's free to go and create something else. Now you don't need to worry about getting the revenue, whether it succeeds or fail may affect your pitching for the next project, but technically you're not being able to cover payroll, for example.
Yeah, and I think there's the converse side of that, which is like if everyone goes to contracting, is that you have the most valuable thing in any soft company, in other words, anywhere where we're not producing widgets or something that we physically make, is actually the brain power that is in that room. Right. So for example, if Whitepaper Games decided to like, oh yeah, no, we've just finished documentation, we just need a skeleton crew to maintain it, you can all go off and do whatever you want. All that knowledge of how you put that game together is now fragmented and gone off in different areas. Getting all that team back is much more difficult because they're going, well, no, I've got a great job here or whatever, right? So
yeah, and that's the language that you build, and you create a team where the people that you work with are part of your family almost. And that's, even if you take the financial stuff aside, that's just where we feel most comfortable. We want to create a place that people can just go to for 8-9 hours a day and just feel like rewarded in the work that they do. And the thing with game development is that it's tricky to create a game, and there's all these disciplines interlocking with each other, and we've not really figured out properly how to create games. I don't mean as a white paper, I mean as an industry. There's not like a set process.
If we look at the nearest one, like VFX houses for films and stuff like that, there isn't a prescribed way. Like, okay, so they did Avatar, and a lot of people probably might have copied that afterwards. I'm using that as a random example. Then Transformers came along. Like, I'm just thinking of the more films that are more like making a game, right? They're very tech heavy. And that knowledge went off to another film that I'm sure was not made in the same way, right? There might be a lot of films that were identically produced, but that's not the trend, right? Because it's a technological industry, even though it's art and design and everything else, but it's also tech driven. So there's a lot of change that happens. So once you prescribe it, you have the basics, right? You have like how to animate, you have how to do these things, but technology moves on. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to reference another book. I like my books, and there's a book called Small Giants, and there's a reference in there of a small VFX company who, you know, want to create high quality work. They want to stay small. And the concept of what you're talking about there is that in films and VFX, so there's a film production company, there's a VFX house, there's ultimately large companies all working in collaboration to create this thing. And then again, they expand and they have a portfolio and body of work, and they can move forward in that. And maybe that's what games will become. Maybe a certain team becomes specialized in the AI, and a certain team becomes specialized in design, and there's a collaboration. Oh, this was designed by these people that made this, you know, and movies where you say written by this person who wrote this film, and you may see that. And we definitely get quite a few emails of co-dev collaboration and stuff like that. It's not necessarily something we've considered moving forward on, but you may see development teams, like whole teams band together instead of individual.
Some people or some teams you see that do that, they're like the people that do the porting, for example. Like PlayDigis that did the porting for Cultist Simulator, for example. They just said, like, we'll put it onto mobile. You don't have to worry about it. I'm sure that was a bit more complicated than that. You don't have to worry about it. But they'll handle that side. Like, for example, if you wanted to take the occupation onto iPads or something.
Exactly. And yeah, I mean, we're definitely getting down more of a business route right now, pulling it back from the design, but it's that, yeah, you'll probably see more of that happening. You'll probably see teams specializing in a certain area and coming together to create a certain game, and then it almost, you're splitting your risk there. You can be working on multiple projects in the design space, and maybe that's the way the game industry will move in.
Until then, I'm going to look forward to what Whitepaper Games does next. Can you tell us, or is that?
Not necessarily. We found our direction, which was good, and something I raised in the previous talk is that we're inherently bad at finishing one project and moving on to the next, and transitioning video games is definitely something we can improve on, because there's a couple of months there of just dead time where we're kind of picking up work from the past project and you know, doing your bug fixing and QAing and all that kind of stuff, but also just knowing what the next concept is that you're working on is a tough thing. And this comes back to the kind of disbanding and banding back up again when you have the production in place. Like, there's a few dead months there where you're kind of waiting for game sales, but you're also figuring out what you want to do next, and you don't have a clear idea, so there's a lot of exploration there. I mean, we definitely moved faster on this new game than from the transition from Ether 1 to the occupation. I mean, if you've played Whitepaper games before, you see the occupation's evolution of Ether 1, and hopefully you'll see this as a natural evolution. So you can kind of imagine what type of game it would be. We're currently deciding when we talk about it. You could talk about it early and, you know, drive that interest and post lots of updates. But maybe for the more narrative-driven stuff, maybe you talk about it a little bit later on. I know a few people now in the games industry, people like Mike Bithell, kind of just say, right, here's my game, it's out next week or whatever, and then you launch it. And there's kind of debate there whether, like, what approach you take.
But there's also a big part of development or pre-production, essentially. There's nothing to show, right? There's a lot of either spreadsheets or Word docs that you're trying to get together, the idea together. And
I genuinely think that sometimes the work that people care about is that, you know, you like listening to an interview from the actor that was in that movie, and you enjoy all the content outside of the movie. You may have enjoyed the movie, but you enjoy consuming the content outside the film. And the same with GDC talks or anything like that. I personally like hearing about the process. And I think a lot of people now, whether you're in the games industry or not, like seeing how those games are made. And even if it doesn't appear exciting to you, say you talk about being at Res, and we had the editor open, and it's something we want to, you'll notice that shows that we do, it's the white paper stand, not necessarily just the occupation. So it's like Ether 1's there, the occupation's there, Whitepaper Games, this is how we develop games. And it's almost like that's not necessarily interesting to us, because we see that window for 8 to 10 hours a day or whatever it is people work. And although that's not necessarily the most exciting thing to you, someone that isn't necessarily inside seeing that every day, that stuff is interesting to people, and that's where you start building kind of awareness about the game and, you know, showing that content. And I think it's something that people are really interested in seeing. You see that from the popularity of, like, development diaries and stuff like that.
Right. I mean, you were talking about Ninja Theory. I followed the Hellblade development diaries all the way up to launch, and it's really interesting seeing.
And it's the marketing. It's that someone needs. I read a stat, and I think it's correct in that someone needs to see something 13 times before they actually say, "There's my money." Whether it's like a quick post scroll past, or whether you see a trailer or whatever. Like, there's 13 different impressions that you need to make for someone, unless they're part of your core tribe, your 1,000 true fans. If they're not that, they'll probably want to see. They're kind of part of that middle band where they're not necessarily the early adopters. They're not willing to take the risk. Whatever happens, they're kind of waiting to figure things out. Maybe they've seen, like, oh, this got nominated for an award. This reviewer said this. They're piecing the information together, and, you know, after maybe around about 13 times, it's the jump off. So you see in the Hellblade development diaries, it's just like, oh yeah, Hellblade, now Hellblade, and you kind of come into that momentum of, now I want to buy Hellblade.
Yeah, and I think that's always really good, and I bet you what a lot of people are thinking of, especially maybe in indies, and Sean Murray from Hello Games actually touched on it, and that's a very big example, but is the opposite of side of that. Like, we've had these chats, it's like, but what if we don't put this in the game, right? Will people, like, months later or years later when we ship it, going, I watched a video in which you showed there was a gun in the game. like, yeah, well, that was like the default gun from the first-person character at the time, or whatever.
Yeah, that's a weird thing. I definitely don't have a good answer for it. And it's setting the expectations. My gut feeling on that is that how many copies did No Man's Sky sell? And yes, there was the vocal people online. My gut is to say that they were a vocal minority, the people that picked it up, and I know people that enjoyed it. Yeah, I was missing that. And so you're always going to have the few vocal people that, complain about something. But I think the process and showing the game and showing what concepts you're exploring and how you come to certain design decisions, my gut is to say that will outweigh, oh, by the way, that 9 months ago I saw that weapon, why is that not there?
Yeah.
I feel like the kind of positives outweigh the negatives there.
Yeah, and as you say, it can be the loud, rattly can rather than the full, can full of love from your fans. Thank you for this, Peter.
Cool.
If people want to get hold of you, what's the best way to do that?
Just at Whitepaper Games on everything is the best social channels to follow.
And if you want to follow us, we are at Level Design FM on Twitter. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thanks, Mike.
Bye.